Welcome to my class once again, friends and students. My subject today is Aristotle's Catharsis. Critics have very correctly pointed out that the two terms in Aristotle's Poetics, which are most complex and most difficult to explain and interpret, are mimesis and catharsis. Mimesis has been translated into English as imitation, but many editors and translators like Professor Bywater, whose translation I shall be referring to here in my class. This Professor Bywater has retained the Greek word catharsis. He has not tried to substitute it with any English equivalent, because perhaps a translation would have been rather an inadequate translation. Now, what is catharsis? In which connection has Aristotle used this word catharsis? That we have to note first of all. In chapter 6 of Poetics, Aristotle has given the definition of tragedy. Tragedy is an imitation of an action that is serious, entire, and of a proper magnitude by language embellished and made pleasurable, using the method not of narration but of action, and effecting through pity and horror a catharsis of these emotions. Now you can see, I have written down on the board only the last part of the definition, with incidents arousing pity and fear, wherewith to accomplish its catharsis of such emotions. So the incidents or the action in the play will arouse pity and fear. Why? To accomplish its catharsis of such emotions, meaning to have a catharsis, to effect a catharsis of the emotions of pity and fear. The emotions of pity and fear will be aroused by the incidents presented in the dramatic play, and that will ultimately make a catharsis of these emotions, meaning the emotions of pity and fear. Now, in Poetics, Aristotle has used the word catharsis only once. In chapter 6, in two other chapters, Aristotle speaks of pity and fear, and he also mentions that pity and fear, these are the emotions that must be aroused, and these two emotions finally will be evacuated to generate the tragic effect. But the term catharsis has been used only once. And in Poetics, we do not have much interpretation of catharsis. He has only cursorily talked of catharsis, as I said, in 2 other chapters of Poetics. So, to understand Poetics, we have to refer to 2 other works of Aristotle, Historia Animulum and Poetics. In these 2 works of Aristotle, he has taken up the issue of catharsis and the interpretations which are so common today, which are so popular and so familiar with the readers, are given by critiques. So what Aristotle himself meant by catharsis is not clearly explained in Poetics. In order to understand Aristotle's point of view, as I said, we have to refer to 2 other texts of Aristotle. Poetics gives us only an inadequate interpretation, discussion of the term catharsis. But, well, there are critics, I shall be talking about them, but there are critics who have interpreted catharsis in various ways. I shall be talking about those critics and their explanations presently. But let us be very clear about this, that catharsis means the tragic pleasure, or rather catharsis will generate the tragic pleasure. Out of catharsis we have the tragic pleasure. Now Aristotle, we all know, was against his own preceptor, his guru Plato, on many counts. But one very important point in which he agreed with his preceptor, his guru, his teacher Plato, was that poetry gives us pleasure. Tragedy, as Aristotle says in his Poetics, tragedy, comedy and epic are 3 forms of poetry, tragic poetry, he says. So the pleasure that tragic poetry gives us is the pleasure of catharsis. How this tragic pleasure comes to us, that is the point. And we have to definitely deliberate on this point. Now, look at the board. How does tragic pleasure come? I have written. It comes through pity and fear. This pity and fear are aroused how? By the set of incidents which are presented dramatically. And there is ultimately a catharsis of the same emotions, pity and fear. So we can say arousal, evacuation, pleasure. The 2 emotions are aroused, they are evacuated, and we have the pleasure. But how? How does it come? And there are certain theories. I shall come to the theories by and by. Theory of purgation, the theory of purification, the theory of clarification, and also there are 2 other theories, the theological interpretation and the psychological interpretation of the term catharsis. So we shall come to the explanation, and before that I shall write out some other points on the board. Now look at the board. Now I have written the name of Lessing. It was Lessing who first, tried to analyze the whole thing. He takes up Plato's charge against poetry. Plato said that poetry generated or aroused such soft emotions like pity and fear. And Plato was of the view that such soft emotions would be detrimental to the moral upbringing of the young men. But Aristotle, according to Lessing, Aristotle answers the charge by pointing out that the emotions are aroused only to be evacuated. So although soft emotions like pity and fear are aroused, but such emotions are evacuated, and through the process of evacuation, the tragic pleasure is generated. But this leads us to a very important and crucial question. What does evacuation mean? Pity and fear, these two emotions, are they evacuated completely? Does evacuation mean a complete evacuation of the emotions? If these two emotions are completely evacuated, will that be good for human beings? Or does it mean the evacuation of the excess, or evacuation of only the polluted portion? So that is the question which has been taken up. And this question are interpreted and analyzed by different critiques. I told you of Professor Bywater. Professor Bywater wants to interpret catharsis as a medical metaphor, that pity and fear are aroused, and when pity and fear are evacuated, there is a sense of relief. Now, there is, I told you about Aristotle's Poetics. Remember that in Aristotle's Poetics, there is a part which says that music, which is full of religious frenzy, can cure the actual religious frenzy in men. Now I repeat, music which concerns religion or religious frenzy can cure the actual religious frenzy in human beings. So This statement of Aristotle in Poetics was taken up by John Milton in his preface to Samson Agonistes. In Samson Agonistes, in the preface, he says, pity and fear are artificially stirred to expel the latent pity and fear we bring with us from real life. So pity and fear are stirred up in the process of the play, and this can expel the pity and fear that you bring with us from our real life. Now, well, if you look at the whole thing, we can look at if you look at the medical metaphor, we should see that this medical metaphor can be interpreted in a very interesting way. And I should write down that immediately. I was talking to you about Lessing and Milton. Now, both Lessing and Milton, in a way, advocated for the purification theory. Pity and fear artificially stir up, expel the latent pity and fear we bring with us from real life. And, well, critics have likened this to almost homeopathic treatment. In homeopathy, the formula of like curing the like is applied. And here also we find almost such a thing. Pity and fear artificially stirred up to expel pity and fear, like curing the like. And what will be the effect? The expulsion or evacuation of pity and fear finally will generate emotional calm. Now, well, we may remember Milton's Samson Agonistes and the very famous line, all passions spent, calm of mind. So when passions are spent, the mind becomes calm. And how can the passions be spent? Well, by arousing them. But the 16th century neoclassicists, they have another theory. And according to them, pity and fear can cause the evacuation of anger, pride, impiety. So pity and fear will be aroused, and thereby three very evil things in human mind can be expelled. Anger, pride, and impiety, two words. So the theory of 16th century neoclassicists reminds us of allopathy. Unlike curing the unlike, meaning antidote is given in allopathic medicine. We know that antidote is given. Well, some germs have infected my body, an antidote will have to be given. So what will be the antidote to anger, pride, and impiety? The antidote will be pity and fear. So this is almost allopathy. Now, Professor Humphrey House rejects the theory of the medical metaphor, because theatre is not a hospital. And the spectators are not patients. That they come to the theatre to be cured of some of their ailments, mental ailments. Now there is another theory which is called the psychological theory. And in this theory, the proponents of this theory, they say that fear means withdrawal and pity means approach. And the combination of them, the compromise of these two emotions can give us a balance, can give us the balance of mind. So withdrawal and pity. Withdrawal means, well, we move away. When we feel the emotion of fear, we move away. And when we feel the emotion of pity, we approach, we come near. So these two apparently contradictory or contrary emotions both are needed in our life for compromise, a balance. So fear and pity aroused can ultimately bring balance to the human mind. So there is another explanation that fear and pity, arousal of them and the evacuation of them can give us this formula, the formula of struggle, comprehension and enlightenment. And finally, we can say that this is the clarification theory. So, the purification theory, the purgation theory, and the clarification theory. Now, I shall come to the clarification theory presently, but before that, let us talk something more about the purification theory and the purgation theory. So, well, this theory, that fear, pity and fear cause the evacuation of anger and pride and impiety. So this is a process, as if a process of purification. And well, that the latent pity and fear will be evacuated with the help of stirring pity and fear in us through the dramatic poetry, through the tragic poetry. This definitely is the purgation method. So catharsis has been defined or explained or interpreted as a purgation process, as a purification process. And also, as I said, well, some have tried to discuss it from a psychological point of view. Professor I.A. Richards has done this, that well, the two apparently contradictory emotions, but they are balanced in the human mind, because both of them are necessary, withdrawal and approach. So fear and pity, if both of them are generated in the mind, they will finally give us compromise and balance. But the final thing, the final interpretation, that is the theory of clarification. Coming to that, so well, that says that struggle, the struggle of the individual, that gives comprehension. As the spectators look at how Oedipus suffers. Why Oedipus suffers? What did he do? He was completely blameless. Well, there was a prophecy from a temple that this child would be the cause of his father's death, and this child would ultimately marry his mother. So this prophecy came to Oedipus's father Laius, and Laius ordered his men to kill the baby. The shepherd did not kill the baby, left him there. Oedipus grew up. He didn't know that Laius was his father. And on the way he killed his father Laius and came to the kingdom of his father. And there, when his people were the people of the country, they elected him to the throne. According to the custom of the country, he had to marry his mother, because the custom was there that the widow of the past king, the erstwhile king, should be the wife of the new king. So Oedipus married his mother. And finally, when the truth came, it was a disastrous discovery for Oedipus and Jocasta. But Oedipus was blameless. But this happens. This is a struggle. And the spectators, they watch the struggle of Oedipus and they comprehend how life moves. This is the process of the movement of life. And when they comprehend, finally the enlightenment comes. Perhaps this is the clarification theory. Now I shall come to it in greater detail right now. Now, well, clarification, I was talking to you. The tragic pleasure is the pleasure of learning and understanding. The clarification theory says this: learning comes from the discovery of the relation that exists between the particular objects or action represented and certain universal elements embodied in it. So what is the clarification theory? Now we see the life of Oedipus, or rather in the play we see the final part of Oedipus's life. And we learn how Oedipus finally had to suffer, apparently for the scene for which he was not responsible. The scene of patricide or the scene of incest in Oedipus's case perhaps cannot be called a scene at all, because he was not aware of the fact that it was his father or that was his mother. But from this particular incident or from this particular story, and moreover from the particular way in which the poet handled this, we learn, we discover certain things which are integral to the understanding of life. In other words, the particular instance moves us to, leads us to the understanding of that universal truth. Now, Antigone, in Sophocles' great play Antigone, what happens to Antigone? Did she commit a crime? No. It was not a crime, and at the same time it was a crime. She went to give at least a symbolic burial to her brother. She went there to discharge her duty. That was not a crime. But to do that, she had to defy the command of the king. And that was a crime. Well, according to the context of the time, that was a crime. And she was convicted and she was given sentence of death by Creon. And Creon, did he do the right thing? Yes. Did he do the right thing? No. Because he was the king. He had to punish without thinking of the personal relationship. But at the same time, he was a father. And he did not listen to the entreaties of the son. So for becoming a true king, he became unjust to his own son and to his wife. So, well, very intricate situation it was. Particular situation. But this gives us a general truth, a universal truth, making us understand that we never know, we can never perhaps fully decide what is just and what is unjust. So the clarification theory is that the incidents which present to us the struggle of the individual, in a way, teaches us. These incidents teach us. We learn from these incidents. What do we learn? We learn the basic truths which are universal. So, from particular incidents, we become aware, become familiar with universal laws. We learn universal laws. We discover universal laws. We discover the universal truth from the particular. Thereby, it is, in a sense, a play, in a sense, clarifies doubts from the minds of the spectators. Now, this is an explanation or an interpretation given by certain critiques. But we have to definitely agree that there are so many parts of the human experience, subtle parts, which cannot be explained by such general laws. In fact, the definition of Aristotle and the clarification, the explanation of the definition given by Aristotle by critics cannot fully cover all the issues that are related with human experience. So, although it is said that the clarification theory comes very close to explaining the significance of catharsis, we cannot say that clarification theory holds the entire truth, the complete truth to us. Now, critics have said that, well, this book was compiled by Aristotle's students after Aristotle's death. This was the first draft, and perhaps Aristotle could not think of making a full book from the first draft. Had he remained alive, he would have definitely changed, edited, omitted certain parts, would have added certain parts, but this he could not do. because of his sudden and premature death. Therefore, well, perhaps it's not very clear to us. The purgation theory, the purification theory, the psychological theory, and finally the clarification theory, none of them can clearly explain catharsis to us. But as I said just now, the clarification theory definitely goes closest to the interpretation of the theory of catharsis by Aristotle. But before I end, I have something more to tell you. Now, look at the board. The poet has the power of taking the hearer out of his ordinary self. Now, this is a transformation through command of words. Now, Abhinavagupta has pointed this out, that Abhinavagupta belongs to the Indian aesthetics. He has pointed this out, that well, transformation is possible through the command of words. And Abhinavagupta has given us the example of Kalidasa's Shakuntala, Vigyan Shakuntala. He has taken an instance that the king was chasing a deer, and the deer was trying to run away. The flight of the deer, trying to escape impending death, may painfully affect the spectator. But that will not happen because of the command of words. Poetry can transform the personal into universal. Poetry can show how and what Oedipus suffered by reason of necessity and probability. Now we have to remember that Aristotle recurringly uses these two terms, probability and necessity. So by reason of necessity and probability, Oedipus suffered. And poetry can show this. And when poetry shows this, what is painfully personal can be transformed into something pleasurable. So this is a kind of poetic pleasure which rises above our personal experience. The poetic pleasure is not confined to the personal experience. So this is the power of poetry. And therefore, when we see the suffering of Oedipus or King Lear, we derive a kind of aesthetic pleasure, because the personal experience is elevated to realization of the universal truth. This realization of the universal truth has been described or defined, in other words, as the clarification theory. Once again, I point out that the personal experience is elevated to the realization. Please note the word realization, understanding of the universal truth. What is the universal truth? the universal truth is presented to us through the two principles, the principle of necessity and probability. And when that is done by the poet, the personal sorrow doesn't exist. We are elevated to a plane where we can understand and experience an aesthetic pleasure. So, well, catharsis can be explained. Catharsis has been explained in various ways, and I have just pointed out some. Thank you very much.